Welcome back to Interview Ninja, the additional dialogue between Alexander and Corbin, and this is part 5. It starts off with how you can adapt your own self-talk using a technique called mantras. And then we move on to thinking more about what's going on in other people's minds and how you can analyze their own thought processes by watching their body language and listening to their conversation in an analytical way. And during this session, Alexander covers several things to look out for that'll give you cues about how other people feel about themselves, about their own status and their own self-esteem. And through that increased understanding, you can interact with them in a more effective way.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about like the approach I normally use and some of the kind of basic sort of techniquery that I use to try to get people to start encoding new behaviours. Some of the sort of specific materials, like stuff that I tend to talk about that relates to the sort of stuff that you've already been covering, relate to things like status and relate to things like negotiation or public speaking or what have you. It's usually through the medium of getting people to practice in a hands-on way. There's one topic that's come up that has to do with basically self-talk and confidence and how you manage yourself psychologically as you go through these kinds of processes. And there are various techniques from the sort of the toolkit that I've established that are useful in that regard. And one of them has to do with mantras. And a mantra is a very sort of simple, silly kind of concept, but it's unusually, it's more powerful than it has any right to be.
Yeah.
And the idea is that an example exercise where you would do this is, as we described this of status game earlier on, where people were going around and they use one specific cue to sort of, and then you basically give people something a little slogan to say in the back of their head. So you have somebody saying, as they go around and meet them and they say, you look at the person, you think, I love you. And the other half of the room, you get people to say, I hate you. And then you go and you look to see, and you ask people, don't make it massive and silly. The idea is not to act it out, but rather to run that slogan at the back of your head when you look at those other people and let it leak out, gently leak out into your behavior.
Just naturally in your,
And then you look and see what happens when people have that slogan running in their head and how they feel and how they interact. And what you see, of course, is that the type of behavior that you get out is really very different from just if you have simple status cues. And also the way in which people emotionally respond to the exercise is very different. And the sense that even though it's just something they've loaded into their head with an I love you, if it's an I love you and you counter an I hate you, even though there's no actual language and there's no actual purpose beyond a game that lasts 2 minutes. People feel that spontaneous sensation of like, but I'm trying to be nice to you here. It's like, don't you feel this too? You get the visceral response anyway. And you can then take this idea and embellish it up. So you can play in the game where you have people walking around the room and one half of them are saying, you're the solution to my problem, and the other half of the room is saying something like, you're wasting my precious time, or whatever. And then you have you're the solution to my problem. People like, hey, and you're wasting my precious time. Like, hi, and you get all of those kinds of attendant different behaviors and different spontaneous emotional sensations. What this means is that you can, because you get such a spontaneous effect, you can use mantras as a tool to inform how you feel about a particular space or a situation, or how you're likely to be perceived. So I've had people do this in a public speaking context where they go out to give a talk, and they basically just load a mantra into the back of their head. Every time they have a little free brain cycle, instead of just thinking normally, they just go back to the mantra and they think, I own this room, or these people love me, or, I'm awesome, or, watch me fly, or whatever it is. You pick your slogan that basically is the one that you're going to project. I'm master of this terrain, or whatever. And then you just iterate it to yourself.
And it just comes out. Yeah.
And it just leaks out through your body language.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of the stuff to do with body language has to do with, understanding and being able to sort of pay attention to specific techniques and understand, somebody who's doing this versus, sort of tell me more. There's all these clusters of behavior to do with like, somebody who's sort of like giving you truly straight information versus, concealing information, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You've got all these cues, you get used to watching and seeing all these clusters of physical stuff, but often the most effective way to tap into that stuff is to trick your brain because of the way your brain is wired and because all these behaviors come in clusters. You can basically get yourself to the place where if you want to project something, you can leverage your own neural wiring to basically sort of like layer it in relatively little cost and often quite pronounced personal effect. It doesn't, of course, that doesn't teach you the radar of being able to spontaneously recognize all the kind of interpersonal clusters. But, what we're talking here is about, motivation and confidence and that sort of stuff. The only way to really get very effective at being able to read the motivation and the confidence levels of others is just the practice of doing exercises and watching. But one thing I will say that I think is important about this, that has to do with the status stuff we were saying earlier in the, the body language game, is that status and self-esteem are two completely different things. People have an automatic tendency to see or imagine that somebody's status, like the extent to which they seem to be in control of the situation, or the extent to which they seem to be, humble and whatever, that relates to their self-confidence, and it kind of doesn't. So, for instance, you get basically sort of what you might think of as self-esteem behaviors as opposed to, status behaviors. So, like, you might think of like, a Jeeves kind of character is someone who's low status but terribly high self-esteem. Might Sir prefer the beige coat this morning? That sort of stuff is it's low status
because they're just looking after you, and yet they do the job with confidence and
exactly. So they are actually inhabiting a tremendous wellspring of self-confidence, but they're not
necessarily a higher status than
that's right. And equivalently, you get those characters who are like, I want to see those TPA reports on my desk by 9 a.m. Do you understand? You get that person. That's high status, low self-esteem. And you get, what's interesting is when you go into, a situation you could watch, you could see, like, what are the status cues I'm getting from this person? And then what are the self-esteem cues that I'm getting? Because they can be really very, very different. And indeed, also what status cues are perceived as being polite or comfortable or appropriate varies from culture to culture. Like the US, there's a huge amount of emphasis on eye contact, relatively high status behavior. That's considered the comfortable social norm. If you play status games with people from Japan, often they feel like, the people who are, if you go play those games with a bunch of Americans, they feel like the people who are not making eye contact are somehow rude. And the people who are making eye contact are somehow honest. There are East Asian cultures where sometimes the reverse is true, where this seems polite because you're not getting in somebody's face, but this seems appallingly aggressive. So it really just depends upon. That's the other thing, is that status behavior
cultural, isn't it?
Yes, it's cultural. It's culture norms, like whatever gender norms people grew up with, all the stuff to do with what kind of family they come from. It's like you get this whole different spectrum of stuff that's very context dependent. So in an international training context, it's very easy for people to misread status cues. The interesting thing is that state self-esteem cues tend to be pretty robust. So something I don't know if Dad has talked about is things like and showing up in language. Has he talked about that stuff? So you get people who they put lots of breaks into their language. And what's really happening is when you do and you're leaving status gaps, you're leaving offers of
For
opportunities
someone else to stamp you down or get.
or to take over control of the conversation. Exactly, yes. And it's not necessarily intended for it to be. There's not an anticipation.
It's not malicious. But it's just if that opportunity is there are people that will take it to get on top. Yeah.
Right. So people who say and a lot, often it's not that they are actually bad speakers or who have trouble speaking. It's that they have gotten a socially encoded habit of subconsciously leaving room for other people to grab the control stick in a conversation. Whereas, at the other end of the scale, you get the people who take their breaths in the middle of their words. So people will talk in an ongoing, constant run, and they will only, when they get to the centre of their words, actually then pause for breath, so they never have to.
So you can't just butt in,
Right. Yeah. So you get, these attendant behaviours. In actual fact, the person who takes their breaths in the centres of their words is more likely to be low self-esteem. Because that's somebody who they can't let go.
They feel the need to keep that level of.
Yes, yeah. And that's generally speaking a way to tell what's going on in terms of status and self-esteem is lower self-esteem people have to cling to whatever status role that they feel that they are comfortable in. So a low self-esteem person either always has to be high status, or they never want to be high status.
Yeah.
They always want to be, it's your fault, I took responsibility, I was only following orders, or you're going to do exactly what I say. As opposed to, people who have high self-esteem tend to...
They don't mind losing out on a high level position.
That's right.
What's the word? I don't know what the word is. But yeah, they're not afraid to maybe take the back seat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's more elastic.
Yes.
So I think one thing is when one is coming to this material and learning it the first time out, as well as the stuff that we talked about to do with the making a safe space for training, it's easy to look at the stuff you haven't encoded yet or the stuff that you haven't done yet, and then take a little bit of a sort of a personal hit from kind of like, I'm doing this wrong, or I don't have all this stuff on lock. All of these tools are incredibly powerful, and they, at some level, open your eyes to watching and understanding how people interact. I like to quote the Spider-Man movie with the rest of this stuff. With great power comes great responsibility. But also, every one of these things comes with they're all a plus. There is a huge number of... A lot of the emotional damage that people incur in the course of life is damage that they incur unto themselves. They look at the stimulus that they get from the world and they attach a meaning to that stimulus. And then they basically validate or experience failure based upon their personal parsing of the stimulus that they get. In actual fact, a lot of what one can do in life, if you get used to the practice, is introduce a little reframing pause between the stimulus that you get and the way you respond to it. Give yourself time to reframe, to think. When you get some stimulus, you think, well, okay, but that wasn't exactly what I had in mind. However, what it does give me the opportunity to do is blah. So when they look at people in leadership roles and things like this, and they look at the people who, when they're confronted with like stimulus that they don't want, that they either blank it and don't acknowledge it, or they basically confront it, versus the people who spontaneously reframe. The reframers tend to be, faster, smarter, more effective, more flexible, more emotionally stable. They get more done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. But so a lot of what will provide you, I think, with the best emotional tools for navigating, early career stuff, which is freaking hard, crazy landscape, is take the time to reframe. Every time something comes along that's untoward, you sort of think, is there a win for me in this? I bet there's a win. There's a win hidden in here somewhere. You just take the opportunity and then basically
find a win. Suss out where it is.
Find your win, and then almost just kind of weaponize it and turn it into your next mantra. Use that as your next piece of self-talk, And the more that you do, the more practice you'll have, and the easier it will get. But this is sort of blah 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 blah. I'm now starting to run out of word juice. I've been babbling like a maniac.
Yes.
You've got any thoughts or questions or things you want to say? Because I'm talking like freaking mile.
No, it's good. It's good because
Okay.
there's lots and lots of really juicy stuff that we will pull out,
Yeah.
and I will make into which I'll probably compress all of this into about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It'll be 5 good minutes.
Yeah.
There definitely are other questions. It's about. Oh, now my mind's gone totally blank. All I can think about is the Spider-Man 2 quote. It's the only thing in my head.
Yeah.
No, I think we've covered lots of really good stuff. I think Graham's going to enjoy watching it back. I'm going to enjoy watching it back. I feel like all my questions that I've asked have been entirely answered.
Oh, okay, good. I usually have this thing where I sort of think, I don't have any questions, and then 10 minutes goes by, and I'm like,
yeah, well, that'll almost definitely be it. No, I'm happy. I'm content.
All right, okay, groovy.
Got loads of good stuff.
Yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed this long session, over an hour. And we split it into 5 parts to make it more easily digestible. But there's a heck of a lot in there about conversation, analysing it, critical analytical thinking, and how you can revisit your own thought processes and also understand better the thought processes that other people are using when they talk to you. Now, it's a good time for you to start thinking more about your own interaction with other people, especially through the medium of conversation, and also how you present yourself to others and how they perceive you. So party on, and let's get back to the more normal Corban dialogues that are a part of this Interview Ninja course.